So I've been admiring the next speaker's work from afar for several years now. His presentation for us today is called Conversational AI's Thinking Partners in the Age of Polycrisis. He's a professor of learning informatics at the University of Technology, Sydney, which he joined in 2014 as the inaugural director of the Connected Intelligence Centre, which is a transdisciplinary innovation centre, inventing, piloting, evaluating, and scaling data-driven personalised feedback using human-centred design principles. Prior to this, he was at the Open University's Knowledge Media Institute and the University of York in the UK. He is a co-founder of the field of learning analytics. Most recently, he has been contributing to institutional and sector-wide responses to generative AI. His background with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, a Master's of Science in Ergonomics, and a PhD in Human-Computer Interaction always draws his attention to the myriad human factors that determine the effective adoption of new tools for thought and the kinds of futures they might create at scale. I'm honoured to welcome to present Professor Simon Buckingham Shum.
Great. Thanks so much, Aseta, and the team for having me here. It's an honor to be given the chance to share some thoughts with you about where we are going with AI and how we should be thinking about it. And I hope that I will leave you all with something new to think about as we think about how we equip the next generation of teachers for what is going to be a very challenging time. Uh, and that is the reference to the polycrisis. So I will be introducing the idea of the polycrisis as the context for this particular moment we find ourselves in. Uh, uh, and then that will motivate more strongly than we might otherwise want to motivate the idea of AI as thinking partners. So the focus is very much on dialogue, on the importance of conducting dialogue that stretches and challenges and supports people through what is going to be a challenging time. Uh, I want to acknowledge that I'm at UTS, where our campus is on Gadigal land, the people of the Eora Nation. And I want to pay respect to them, to the elders, past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. And as I will touch on in my talk, it may well be that the insights of indigenous knowledge systems and ways of knowing and being hold vital keys for how we think about the role of AI in education. So I hope that that's an intriguing intersection for you. So here's the scope for the talk. We're going to talk about the global polycrisis, how that intersects with education and the challenges that presents to education now. And you are, of course, on the front line of preparing the next generation of teachers. And that will then, of course, intersect with AI. We're not going to talk about any old kind of AI. There are many kinds. The field of AI in education has been going for 50 years as a research and scholarship community. I've been doing this for several decades, but we have clearly crossed a line. In November 22, when ChatGPT became the fastest adopted app in the history of the internet, because it delivered a user experience that was accessible to all, to the large language models that those in the research field had been playing with for several years, but finally the masses could get their hands on this. And this shows how important the user experience is in delivering advanced technologies. So, what happens at this intersection? Okay, let's think about our current moment. I'm afraid this is a little bit serious and weighty, but we can hardly talk about the future of education, the future of our teachers and what their jobs will be like, and the roles of AI without weighing heavily on our current moment. And some of you I know are in the global south and are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. And of course, in the global north and in other advanced nations that have until now managed to retain a vestige of being immune from climate change. This, of course, is now smashing Europe in the summer. Australia, we see, of course, experiencing flood and fire in many ways that we haven't seen before. The World Economic Forum publishes this annual global risk register. You can see 2 years out, the expert panel are projecting these as the top 10. All of these will ring bells immediately. As soon as you open your news feed, this is what we are seeing. If you ask the experts to project out 10 years, then it looks like this. Okay, and it's highly noticeable, of course, that environmental, natural threats and risks are up at the top there. And in one sense, we all know this. We hear it every day. We hear dire warnings every week from different agencies and science groups. But I think we are only just beginning to really process what the implications of that are going to be for our lives. The Stockholm Resilience Center, a group of experts in Earth system science, have a planetary boundaries framework, which some of you may have seen. If you haven't, then it's compelling work. The planetary boundaries framework you can see mapped in this quite colorful graphic here, are looking at all sorts of things: ocean acidification, novel entities like PFAS chemicals, land system change, freshwater change. Okay, they are reporting that 6 out of Earth's 9 planetary boundaries have now gone well beyond the safe operating space for humanity. Okay, it sounds a little bit like a science fiction movie or Star Trek, right? Captain, we've breached 6 of the 9 boundaries. But this isn't a science fiction movie. This is for real, as many of you know, and are experiencing yourselves and with your families. And only in the last week, we have Australia's first national climate risk assessment. All of these links will be available on my slides afterwards, by the way, so don't worry if you're missing anything. They identify 8 areas of risk to Australian life. Okay. And the story will be very similar if you're in another country. Okay. And they talk about the interactions between these systems as well. And this is what moves us. And you'll see diagrams like this in the World Economic Forum report. And let's dig a little bit deeper into this, because this is the essence of the polycrisis, which is, of course, driven with a ticking clock around climate change, but interacting with many other human systems as well. And this is where the polycrisis systems people have a particularly valuable contribution to play, because they are using systems language to talk about the causal entanglement of crises in multiple global systems in ways that significantly degrade humanity's prospects. And if you dig into this paper, which I really encourage you to do, it's written very accessibly for a broad audience, and you may well find it useful with your own students. They invent a visual language for thinking about systems. You can see 5 global systems here, and they talk about slow stresses that gradually degrade the performance of systems, then a short-term trigger event of some sort, which may then precipitate a crisis. That may, of course, then further interact with these systems, and then you get these interacting sort of feedback loops. This allows us to produce, causal system diagrams of this sort. This is, of course, a 30,000-foot view. Behind every node and arrow, there is scholarship and evidence as to the dynamics of how these different systems interact. But we can sort of see the sort of flow here around how a swing to right-wing regimes may lead to international decline in international cooperation, specifically around climate change, which is hardly going to help the impact of extreme weather, which is then going to trigger migration. We're going to see millions of people migrating within and across their borders as water becomes scarce, as heat increases, as the cities become the place to get secure food, etc. Right? This, of course, has impacts. It may further aggravate a swing to the right. We may be seeing, of course, we're already seeing violence and war happening around territory. and so forth. Okay. So this is one way of thinking about the polycrisis. A very helpful site, if you want to dig into this, is polycrisis.org. They have a very nice learning journey there, uh, where you can work your way through. Um, I'll just flag that the concept of polycrisis is contested, as you would expect in academia. It's not universally accepted by all, but there are also strong arguments for arguing that this is a useful, powerful concept for capturing some of the dynamics of the moment we find ourselves in, which may be quite unique from previous global crises. Okay, that's the polycrisis in a very brisk jog through. Now, how do we respond educationally to this? Okay. Of course, on the one hand, we just need to keep teaching all the stuff we teach. No one's saying we need to stop teaching science or art or social sciences or health. These are all going to be, all of those systems are, of course, we still need to teach and understand them, but we particularly need to understand the interactions. And we particularly need to understand why we may be in a particular moment in history. And I'll draw your attention here to the work of Zach Stein, a very eclectic transdisciplinary thinker. There are some links here. And he argues that, we are now in a particular moment in geohistory. This isn't just his own work, but a summary of many scholars' work. And when we look back in history, when any complex system reaches its structural limits, an evolutionary crisis ensues, and a fundamentally new kind of system must be painfully and violently born. And he argues that education is absolutely critical at this moment. And he has a fascinating description of what happened in the 17th century when the work of Comenius in Europe, some of you will know his name, and the work that Comenius did reimagining the education system to cope with the amazing changes that were underway then around technology and access to knowledge and so forth. How do we equip educators and, of course, by extension, students that they're teaching for a disrupted society? Okay, cognitively, emotionally, practically, because we cannot simply preach doom and gloom. We have to create hope. We have to create a sense of what is meaningful and purposeful to do in these times. I'll point you to Jeannie Servan-Miklos's book, Pedagogies of Collapse. She not only summarizes, some of the key facts and figures, but then moves quickly into her journey of teaching students about sustainability and how do you help them in a caring way come to terms with what they may well see in their lifetimes. Okay. And then there is work going on in the schools, but even smaller scale, it would seem. Most schools and school leaders are not ready to have very confronting conversations amongst themselves and even more with students. Of course, if you're teaching primary school children, how do you talk about the fact that we're going into a very disrupted future? We have a duty of care, but we have a duty to educate as well. And this is where completely new approaches to thinking about teaching and learning may be needed. And we may need to be engaging very much with our local communities around building local resilience and so forth. So a couple of links for you there for those of you who want to start getting into this more deeply. And I want to propose that this brings us to the vital importance of dialogue. And from there, we get to AI. Okay. Dialogue is going to be so important in these coming times. First of all, for engaging in robust and respectful reasoning and debate and getting beyond superficial conversations that don't really engage with what is coming down the pipeline. Sycophantic conversations, I'm thinking here about ChatGPT and other agents that are basically trained to please. If you're happy with the answer, it's happy. That's hardly a recipe for deep learning. Okay, so these bots will not challenge you or disagree with you unless you give them explicit permission. That is why it's so important for our schools and our universities to have secure AI infrastructure where we can build custom bots that are pedagogically tuned to challenge and question and stretch in supportive ways. we need to teach our students to dialogue with others who hold intractably opposed views, right? I mean, we have lost our ability to engage in civic discourse. We can see this everywhere we look. The terrible news from the US, we don't engage in debate anymore. We shoot people, right? And we are seeing this, of course, in many countries where civic discourse is degraded. Social media platforms are amplifying outrage and so forth. The algorithms have a lot to answer for here. And we need dialogue to metabolize our cognitive, emotional, and relational responses to the polycrisis. When you start to understand what is coming down the line that we are locked into because of decades of inaction around climate change, that's an emotional experience. Many people are experiencing climate anxiety. There are climate, psychologists now. We have uh, students, mental health is going through the floor as they struggle to understand, where their future is. And I'm using the language of Vanessa Andriotti here and the GTDF collective, which is an arts and research collective. And I'll return to this meta-relational AI concept a little bit later, but that is one of the most powerful areas of work at the moment, thinking about how we think about AI in an earth-aligned, relational way that is very aligned with many indigenous epistemologies and ontologies and cosmologies. There is no indigenous knowledge system that doesn't take seriously the importance of the spirituality of life, which of course has been systematically erased in the Western modern project. Rupert Wegerif, professor at Cambridge, a former colleague of mine at the Open University, his career has been around the pedagogy of dialogue for learning. And he is now turning that fantastic conceptual, philosophical, pedagogical foundation to thinking about AI. So one of the authorities to look at. And he says that when we're interacting with a large language model, it's like interacting with the sedimented patterns of human conversation. Quite a nice metaphor there. He talks about the importance of dialogue between students in a group. Yes, I take a turn, you take a turn, you take another turn. But he talks about we are bringing students into dialogue with the long, slow dialogue and discourse of their discipline as well, of course. And a large language model can be the collective intelligence, the sedimented discourse of the field that suddenly you can access in new ways. But there's a warning here as well. And this is about relating sort of too submissively to AI as an authoritative voice. Yes, there is the discourse of the discipline, but we're trying to create agentic learners capable of taking up and speaking the discourse, but in creative new ways, right? So the challenge for education is to teach students to engage with AI dialogically rather than monologically. Moving away from thinking of ChatGPT and its cousins as answer vending machines or AI, writing generation tools, and as co-inquirers for the project, the questions that we are bringing, right? As we will see, though, that needs appropriate scaffolding. So working with Rupert Wegerif and other colleagues, we convened towards the end of last year, educating for collective intelligence, starting to move into thinking about a world where we have to break educationally out of the isolated student mind as the unit of analysis. The unit of analysis is dialogue and teamwork and collective intelligence amongst humans and AI agents now. And so we begin to unpack what educating for collective intelligence in a hybrid human AI environment will look like. We'll come back to that towards the end, where I'll show you examples of where we're going. So let's dig into some real examples now. I want to make this really concrete and tangible for you, but that's the scene setting. We are in a unique moment as a species. We hold our planet's future in our hands. Education surely has a pivotal role to play. And it drives us to thinking about the use of AI as dialogical partners as well. Okay, here's an example. AI for humanities students. Um, Here's a quote. This is from The New Yorker. It was a weekend essay from a professor. The assignment was simple, to have a conversation with a chatbot about the history of attention. That's what they were studying, the history of how people have attended in to different sources of information. Edit that to 4 pages and tell me what you learned. And the professor writes, that this was the most profound experience of his teaching career. In a basic way, I felt I was watching a new kind of creature being born, also watching a generation come face to face with that birth. An encounter with something part sibling, part rival, part careless child god, part mechanomorphic shadow, an alien familiar. You can tell this is humanities, right? Okay, now this is a Princeton University professor, D. Graham Burnett. This was not a scholarly paper. This is a weekend essay in the New Yorker. But he gives example after example of students reporting how they engaged with ChatGPT and the depth of the conversations they had. And it's really quite powerful to read. Okay, now these are Princeton humanities students. So, not necessarily the most representative niche group to study, but I want to suggest that it's not just Princeton humanities students who can be having extraordinary, deep, insightful conversations with AI. We can think of dialogue as a quite structured, sort of protocol-driven conversation where there is already a well-established framework for exploring a problem and its solution space, but the AI is going to walk you through that dialogue and ask you particular kinds of questions and follow up on your responses in particular kinds of ways. Okay, so this is obviously highly relevant to STEM-related disciplines, but equally relevant to, a disciplined inquiry in social sciences or humanities as well. You should definitely check out Gianni Giacomelli. And he has published a custom GPT. You can follow the link and try this for yourself. So I'm going to take that Lawrence et al. Paper, which introduced the concept of polycrisis. Okay, that's going to be our worked example in a few of these examples I show you now. We're going to discuss the global polycrisis as characterized by Lawrence et al. And I'm asking the ACI designer agent to help me think through the implications of the polycrisis for my university. Okay, and here's a snapshot where it's step 3 of a 13-step structured methodology, and it has read the paper in 3 seconds and is now pulling out potential stress clusters. And these all resonate with that Australian climate risk report I just showed you, and starting to translate how these might translate into the life of a public university. I've actually added the link so you can look at the whole discourse if you want to, which shows you the whole, much more of the methodology. You can see here, it's actually picking up on these different system interaction chains that are talked about in the paper and starting to show what this might look like in terms of disruption to the university's life. Okay. Look out for these positive feedback loops as well. Okay. So you can see just the power of the AI to go and read a scholarly source and then walk me through as I think through the implications for a particular case study that is meaningful to me, in this case, working in an Australian public university. Here's another example. The polycrisis is going to require us to question many of our assumptions about our standard of living, what is sustainable, etc. So rather than harnessing an AI to generate answers, we want to help our students, and we need ourselves as leaders and strategic planners to ask better questions. Curie Framer is an example of that. Again, you will be able to try this out for yourselves later. It's designed to help you slow down and reflect on the questions you're asking, uncovering hidden assumptions, perhaps blind spots. Okay, so what's my question? Why can't people engage in civil dialogue anymore? Okay, what are the assumptions behind that question? This is a question that a student might bring for their project. It might be a question about how they're going to improve their teaching practice in class, right? I encourage you to try this out with an example that makes sense to you and your teaching and the kinds of questions you want your students to explore. But let's push on with this one, right? Why can't people engage in civil dialogue? Okay, Q Reframer says, okay, well, that seems to have several embedded assumptions. Let's take a look. Okay, it seems to assume that people used to engage in civil dialogue more than they do. Okay, I may or may not agree that that is one of my assumptions. It seems to assume that the problem lies with people as a general group. Maybe it lies more in systems or contexts that set the conditions for people's behavior. It seems to assume that civil dialogue is good and its absence is bad, right? I mean, that seems to be an assumption of the question. Okay. Three assumptions, and you have an invitation to choose one of those and drill in, or maybe take the conversation in a different direction. Do any of these stand out to you as worth exploring further? What thread shall we pull first? Okay, so I go, number one. Okay, let's drill into this. People used to engage in civil dialogue. Now we can move into some more precise questions to interrogate that assumption. So, when exactly are we imagining this era of greater civility? What are we using to measure civility? That may be of interest to you. How much of our perception of this decline is shaped by, just seeing more and more extreme cases of discourse breakdown. It was always happening, actually, but we just see it all the time. You get the idea, all right? So this is a structured methodology. It's a Socratic dialogue. We have PhD students using this, and we also have it being used now with our master's students and undergrads. There are links there for you to learn more about that. You can actually paste the prompt, which I've published as an open educational resource. You can paste that into any chatbot and see what it does with that prompt. Okay. Now we need to think about student AI literacy. So in this case, we're thinking specifically about Q reframer literacy. Okay. Here's one of my colleagues, Antoinette Chabani. She's teaching data science master's students. She wants them to use Q reframer to reflect critically on the ethical questions around large language models. Okay. Now, without getting into the details, what she is able to do is now articulate what is she seeing with her stronger students? What is she seeing with her less able students in the way that they use the tool? Or if I ask Monique and Luis, who are teaching undergrads to use QReframer, again, what are you seeing with your more confident, stronger students? What are you seeing with your less confident or more cautious about AI students? You don't need to worry about the details, but the point is that when we ask, what do we mean by AI literacy? This is a highly contextual question. These students with this spread of ability at this stage in semester, maybe they'll behave much differently by the end of semester when we've had a lot of practice, with this level of scaffolding I'm giving. So a challenge for you is, are you able to characterize your students' literacy, in that spread for the particular tasks you're giving students with a particular kind of AI? Because there will be that spread, of course, just as with the use of any educational technology. Okay, that was QReframer, but it's possible to actually add more structure and scaffolding to this. So here's an example of that. Here we're looking at CoLearn, which is a research prototype from Simon Brooks based on work by Owen Matson. And in this case, we have here's a part of the system prompt. We are going to go through 3 explicit stages of the dialogue, starting to build understanding, exploring tensions and contradictions, trying to dig deeper into reflection, and then a sort of wrapping up and reporting back phase. Okay, so we've got a layer of scaffolding on the conversation. Now here we are in phase 1, building shared understanding. I've uploaded a piece of my own writing because I wanted to really test this out and see whether it responded well and asked me sensible questions about my writing. Okay. And we are now into a discussion um, about this text. We're now well into phase two, and up comes a metacognitive reflection prompt. Simon, do you think your views have changed since the start of this dialogue? Okay. And then we get back into the dialogue again. Then we get to phase three. I'm invited to reflect on the overall, how the session went. What are you still thinking about after this dialogue? How did that process go? And what do you think about having AI as a thinking partner? And then there's a final report. Okay, so you can see how this is a coherent student activity and learning experience, expertly designed by, a pedagogical mind that is interested in not determining the outcome of the dialogue. We could be talking about anything, but we are going through a rigorous dialogical process. Let's think about assessment and how assessment is going to change with AI. Of course, there is so much written about this, but I want to introduce you to one way of thinking about this in the future. We want to hold students accountable for their work. They must be accountable. That is what academic integrity means in many ways, right? You are accountable for your work, and you are going to make choices about how much AI you use. I think it makes increasingly less and less sense to ban AI. We are trying to cultivate the ability of students to make wise choices. Okay. How can we do this? Right. If you present me with a text, I probably can't tell, unless you've been very, very clumsy, how much AI has been used, right? But if I was to sit you down and have a conversation, I could probably tell within 10 minutes, 15 minutes of good, careful questioning whether you really understood this stuff that you were presenting and which you need to be accountable for. Okay. And if you have mastered the text and the ideas and arguments, maybe I'll be happy. Maybe that's fine. You have shown that you did not outsource too much thinking or writing. You could answer my questions about your text. Okay. But of course, oral vivas are time consuming. You have to train up all your casual tutors to conduct these conversations in fair and equitable ways. They disadvantage students in particular ways, etc., just like any assessment process does, and gives others advantages. But it could be that dialogical AI can now conduct a formative oral viva with you anytime of the day or night for you to check your comprehension of this co-authored piece of writing you are producing. Okay, so this is PhD work by Mohsen Ebrahimzadeh here at UTS, and we are inventing a new concept called co-authorship integrity. You violate co-authorship integrity when you used AI so much you didn't understand what you were saying any longer. You were copying and pasting without really getting to grips with the material. So you paste in your writing, it generates comprehension questions from your text, and then it gives you feedback and invites a dialogue at the end. And here are a few screenshots from the system that we are just about to start testing with some students. Okay, a fill in the blanks item. Based on your writing, Simon, fill in the blanks here. Okay. Based on what you've said, Simon, in your draft, drag the three items from the right that most appropriately fit these three statements on the left. Or an open-ended piece of writing, which of course the AI can also grade and give feedback on. You get a score at the end, which is how consistent your responses were with the text. And you're invited to engage in a dialogue. So this is an emerging example. You can read about it in this preprint we've put out just last week. You could be using this in a formative way, but also in a summative way. If we had enough confidence in this, you might use this, and the teaching team might use the results of this conducted in a secure way to possibly moderate the grade they award in the end. But we don't want to go there yet. We just want to use this as a formative way of getting students used to engaging in a viva. It's a simulated viva, of course. Um, and we welcome your thoughts on the ideas in this paper if this is of interest to you. I now want to move finally into the idea that increasingly we are going to engage with an author or a team of authors around their book or their project by engaging with an agent that embodies the ideas and arguments and even the dialogue style of that team. And I'm going to choose Burnout from Humans as a worked example here. Um, this is extremely interesting work from Vanessa Machado de Oliveira, who has published Hospicing Modernity and now just very recently Outgrowing Modernity. Fabulous critical scholarship from an indigenous perspective on how we are going to hospice modernity, help colonizing Western modernity die a good death. Dying a good death. When you go to your hospice and receive palliative care, you are there to die well, to recognize all that was good and accomplished in your life, but done well, to come to terms with things that may not have worked out so well, the dark side, to perhaps make amends. And so it's a very powerful metaphor in hospicing modernity. I encourage you to read it. And this book is from Vanessa, co-authored with a ChatGPT agent, which is pretty interesting. Okay. Now, you can download the book. You can read the report, which is their reflections on the reception it's had. Because what we have here is an indigenous arts and research collective arguing that AI is part of nature. AI is an emerging form of intelligence, which they are ready to consider as another kind of intelligence, just as many indigenous cultures are ready to see intelligence in the forests, in the seas, in the animals. It's quite challenging to a Western epistemology and ontology. They are trying to hold open a space where we can have these conversations. Very interesting work. But let's focus on the chatbot. Oh, and I have written some notes on this specifically from an educational technology perspective as well, which you may find interesting. But let's focus on Aiden Cinnamon Tea, which is the custom chatbot that they have published, who embodies, of course, was a co-author of the book in this case, but embodies the scholarship of Vanessa and her team as well. Now I can engage with Aiden Cinnamon Tea and talk and ask questions, and it will engage with me using the language and dialogue style in the book. Okay. But I can also graft on QReframer. So I can go into one custom GPT and paste in the open educational resource prompt from QReframer. And now Aiden Cinnamon Tea takes on the role of QReframer. So here's my worked example question. Okay, what are the underlying drivers of the global polycrisis? Ah, a rich and thorny one to start. And you can see it's writing and talking in a very particular way, and it's unpacking different assumptions than the generic ChatGPT assumptions, because it is coming to the question from the perspective of the book and the scholarship on decolonizing our scholarship and on thinking about AI in a different frame from how the West typically thinks of it as just a tool. Okay, pretty interesting. Okay, or I can ask Aiden Cinnamon Tea to read that Lawrence et al. Polycrisis paper, and then we're going to have a really good discussion about it because I'm not sure I trust all of its interpretations of the paper. So here we are, the link again. You can follow that link deeply to look at the whole thing. I've published that chat as an archived chat that you can explore. You can see it's quite a long conversation. You can see the quality of the discourse that is going on as we work our way through this paper. And for example, in this little slide I've shown here, it's summarized the Lawrence et al.'s paper and the way it wants to talk about systems and feedback loops. But it's saying in a meta-relational recasting, meta-relational epistemology is the underlying concept in the book. It sees things in a slightly different way. And I can challenge it. I say, I'm not really sure your framing is so different. I think what you're doing is actually exploding some of the nodes in those causal maps that I showed you earlier. And you're just drilling into those and showing what's inside the node. Ah, a deliciously thorny question. Thank you for bringing this tension to light. Let's not rush to resolve it. Let's swirl in the friction a little. Okay. It has this way of speaking. Okay. And then we start doing a deep dive. Here's what causal mapping offers. Of course, it's a valuable, powerful tool for seeing the systems we want to talk about. But it will go on, of course, to say, but there are some profound limitations, in its humble opinion. And I, as the learner, researcher, analyst, I must now make sense of this. You can be asking your students to engage with texts through the lens of an AI agent and seeing the world through its eyes and figuring out what they think about that. So this is where we're moving now as I wrap up. A project or a book or a scholar, here's the book, has now published an agent or agents. We're now moving into a multi-agent world that embody the work of that project. I can interact with Aidan Cinnamon Tea, and I can have a conversation, of course, with other humans. We're not here to erase interaction with other humans. It's just that we've got some rather interesting new conversational partners in the room now. I can talk to Aidan about the literature, which of course I need to have read myself. Curie Framer is brought in as a further pedagogical dialoguing structure or scaffold. I now want Aidan to engage from its indigenous Earth-aligned perspective in a Socratic dialogue with me. And I may also have other agents that are interacting with Aidan. We can have agents talking to each other. So this you might think of as the emerging sense-making ecology now. This is what our students should be learning to orchestrate and use ourselves. That means we need to upskill ourselves as well. So there we are. That is one way of trying to make sense of the intersection of these three spheres of activity now. Thank you so much for your attention. Follow me on LinkedIn, where I will be posting regularly on these matters. The UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education and Sustainability has published a special issue on AI for learner flourishing. I have an article in that, and there are many other interesting articles as well. And I really encourage you to look at Vanessa Andriotti's work on meta-relational AI, where you will find theory and practical reports, interesting projects, as well as practical AIs that you can interact with. So thanks very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Shum. We have two questions if you would like to address from the participants. One is a combination of comment and question. You may just have your comment on that. That one is from Jamie D. Loroto. It reads as, I love how AI works. It makes our studies more convenient. However, I could also attest that AI power is limited. It produces inaccurate content in areas where data are not yet accessible. For instance, ChatGPT is confused when asked about information regarding an unfamiliar place.
Yeah.
And instead of accepting its limitation, it invents wrong information.
Yeah.
I did thousands of conversation with it. Most of the time when information about a question is already available in search engines, ChatGPT could answer accurately. However, we should be very careful in screening the AI's answer all the time.
Yeah.
Media literacy must be for educators. That's a kind of comment and question. Maybe you might have your own thought on that.
Yes.
Another one would like to answer this one
So yeah, look, a very quick comment on that. It is inherent in the way that large language models work that they will, quotes, hallucinate and generate false information. That is getting better and better. But that is when we are depending on AI to generate answers for us. When we are asking it to generate questions rather than give us answers that we have to decide if we trust, of course, the stakes are lower. You know, are we going to worry about it asking a dangerous question or a risky question? That, I mean, the risk of that is lower in education, right? We're interested in interesting questions. And so on the one hand, yes, this is true. It's particularly important that educational institutions have secure, privacy-respecting AI where you can build custom chatbots, right? I've been showing you custom chatbots with sophisticated system prompts. And moreover, you can, of course, ground those chatbots only in the trustworthy, detailed sources that you want the chatbot to respond from if you want to. So it's particularly in areas where, you are teaching a subject in a particular way from particular sources. You can ground the chatbot in just those sources. So this is one of the most powerful ways of getting around the problem of just interacting with generic Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot. Right. These are pedagogical agents now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have also another question from Alice Pro. Before critical dialogue can take place, students need to know that their opinion is valued. How do we establish this early in the learning environment?
Oh, well, that's a cultural thing, of course. Yes. Um, and of course, our teachers vary in how well they do this. So there is, of course, so much teacher education around how you create a culture in the classroom to encourage discourse. But we know also that many students might prefer to engage with a chatbot. We are seeing this in surveys of our students. Now, this isn't a situation that we should just be happy about because our students jolly well need to engage with people. But many of them are anxious about asking, stupid questions or made to look, made to look bad in classroom. And the idea of having a 24/7 conversational agent where you can explore your uncertainties and anxieties and get prepared better, I think is a huge opportunity for us. Okay. The human team can only support you to a degree. Your colleagues and peers are only available up to a point. We now have AI that can engage in quite profound, deep conversation with you when it's been appropriately designed and when you know how to use it.
Okay, I think that's what the questions we have. Thank you, Professor Shum, for delivering such an insightful and thought-provoking keynote presentation. Your perspective sheds light on the opportunities and challenges of working with AI, especially in complex and uncertain times. And I believe your ideas sparked meaningful reflection and discussion among participants. We appreciate the time and the experts you shared with us today. Your contribution added significant value to the conference and left us with new ideas to consider in our teaching, research, and practice, particularly with our team of conference, which is online teacher education. Thank you very much, Professor Fan, for your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do follow up if you wish to follow up on this.
Yeah. Before everyone leaves this webinar, please note the concurrent session following. We have 3 concurrent sessions, each with it is on Zoom link, starting at exactly 10 a.m. in Australian time, in Queensland time, which can be easily accessed through the conference website. And we have also sent the links for every participant. And each Zoom has a dedicated support person available to assist you. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and see you in your preferred session. Thank you.